And here we are. Welcome, guys. Fun to see your faces after 4 to 5 weeks of no live show. It's fun to bring it back. We have an awesome guest here, a guy named Tyler Andrews. And Tyler, you're out in Flagstaff, right?
I am Flagstaff, Arizona, up at 7,000 feet here in the mountains, just south of Grand Canyon. So
Yeah.
it's a good spot to be.
Home of the most beautiful apartment hedges in the world.
It's true. We've really lucked out. I was saying to Nate, like about 1 minute before this interview started, there was a guy trimming the hedges in the apartment parking lot here, and the only plants in our entire little grounds, there happened to be right in front of the window where we're recording. But luckily, it looks like he's finished up, did a great job, so we're ready to go.
I know. Maybe he's tuning into the live show too. It's
Yeah.
always a thing. Where I was joking with Tyler earlier that whenever we're filming, Holly, Morgan, myself are set up. We get everything great, like the perfect shot of like the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and right when we're about to go, it's like some weed whackers start rolling through, and we're just like move on to
Yep.
something else. But anyway, we both have good sound and lighting, which is great. And if you guys are tuning in, let us know where you're coming in from in the comments. We see GDK Mouse in there, Doc Chomp. That's a great name.
Yeah.
YouTube, Tyler, like YouTube usernames are great. They're another level right there. They're super fun. So let us know what you got going on there, and we will get into things. So, guys, I wanted to bring Tyler on our program for a few reasons. That's going to become more and more clear as we continue to go through in today's little chat. But I wanted to start off of March of this year of 2020. And it's a crazy time of uncertainty for the entire world. It's a major time of distress and just downright bummership, if that's a word, bummership for runners who
Bumfest.
are bummerfest, who are contemplating not being able to race Boston. Other spring races are being canceled. Travel is limited. And Tyler is in Nepal. So, Tyler, how did you get yourself to Nepal in March, and what were you doing there?
Yeah, so that's a very reasonable question in retrospect, and I want to start out by saying, I ran the Olympic marathon trials, which were February 29th, and that was really the last really big marathon. It was part of the Atlanta Marathon that happened in the United States, and that was a time, if you remember, all the way back to February 29th, where there were tens of thousands of people on the streets in Atlanta, in nightclubs and restaurants. COVID had just kind of barely arrived in the U.S., and I literally left to go to Nepal the day after the marathon trials.
Incredible.
It was a pretty impulsive trip that I had planned, basically while I was there, and was like, I like to kind of take some time off from structured running and go do something that's like fun and adventurous and outdoorsy and active, but not running. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Nepal for a couple of weeks. And I actually was pretty tuned into the coronavirus situation in Asia because one of my really good friends actually coincidentally was a flight attendant on the
Wow.
US China routes. So he was like
Oh,
super
man.
plugged into this thing from, early January, December, and was like, yeah, it's really contained at that point again to China, Japan, South Korea. You should be fine in Nepal. There were no cases in Nepal. The U.S. again was not locked down. And so what happened was I get to Nepal and I'm off in the Himalayas hiking and trekking and stuff. And it's kind of like Rumpelstiltskin where I'm out of phone service for like 8 or 9 days. And I come back and it's like a completely different world. Like all of the stuff that you're talking about
Wow.
happened like while I was away from cell service and internet, like by myself in this
Incredible.
tiny little hamlet of the Himalaya. And so I came back and all of a sudden, again, I left and it was like everything was normal in the US, big marathon, lots of travel happening, people coming from all over the US. I get back from this first leg of my trip and it's maybe like March 12th or something now. And it's like the NBA season had just been called and like colleges were being called off. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I call my parents and my coach and we're talking about all this. It's like, oh my gosh, just this
Yeah,
crazy
just
flood
this
of information.
unloaded amount. It's amazing you were able
Yeah,
to kind of get back into the country to a certain degree. I remember because my flight out to Atlanta for the marathon trials was my last flight this year,
yeah,
which is normally a very busy travel year and what was done. But I remember listening to reports about COVID just as that was hitting. So let's talk about more about what you were doing in Nepal, and
yeah,
especially that you were out of cell service makes this even more of an adventure. And I think this really ties
yeah,
into the theme of this year because when there aren't races, we as athletes have to find ways to push ourselves and keep ourselves excited anyway. So I would love to hear about this. And also, I guess I kind of forgot that you also ran the Olympic trials. So running the marathon trials on a gnarly course in Atlanta and then immediately getting
yeah.
into a plane for a long flight and then getting all the way to Nepal, like that must have not felt great.
Yeah, but I mean, that's to me, that's the least of it. I think the real like turning point for me, which kind of gets to what you're talking about, was so during this kind of like coming back to reality moment, I was talking to all these people, and I very quickly realized there's going to be no spring racing season for me, like
Mm,
as a professional athlete. Like this is my livelihood, and basically pushing myself. This is how I stay motivated personally and how I support myself financially. And I'm not going to have anything to do for the next few months. That was very clear
mm.
immediately in mid March. And again, that's kind of what changed this trip from a fun hiking vacation to all of a sudden I started thinking about, hey, there's this cool record that I kind of had my eyes on, which is the Everest Base Camp Trail speed record. In trail running, we call it fastest known time,
Right.
which is basically a way of tracking the fastest times that people have covered certain distances that aren't races. So there's lots of these for different routes all over the world that aren't races, and one of them is the Everest Base Camp Trail, which is one of the most famous hiking routes in the world. It goes from Lukla, basically the last town, all the way to Everest Base Camp at about 18,000 feet, and it's about
18,000
65,
feet.
yeah, 18,000 feet, and it's about 65 miles round trip. So I
65
had
miles round
done,
trip.
yeah,
Wow. Incredible.
so I had done all of this hiking piecemeal, like in bit by bit, and normally it takes about 2 weeks for a hiking party to do it, and the record was 30 hours.
Wow.
Um,
And
so
you
a
had
little
done it on
over
a
one
previous
day.
trip? Like you'd been out
No, no,
there?
no. Sorry. Like in this trip, I had done like I had done it bit by bit. So
Got it.
that first 8 or 9 days, when I was out away from cell phone service, I'd been hiking pieces of this trail. So I'd basically done the whole thing, but split up. And I thought, I can probably do it in one big long push. And I thought if I have a really good day and I kind of added up my split times, that I could probably do it in under 24 hours. I could probably do it in one day. That was kind of my A goal.
So was the
Yeah.
plan the whole time to go out there to set an FKT, or was this more of like a post-marathon
No,
trials
not at
hiking
all.
trip
Yeah,
and vacation?
exactly. It was really like it started out as this is for fun, and then
Oh,
it was like
whoa.
once I realized that there were no races coming, I was like, all right, I got to do something. I'm here. I might as well like take a big swing for this really cool thing, even though like normally I would never do something like this. 3 weeks after a major marathon, it was like, all right, I got nothing else to do. I got nothing to lose. I'm not going to be able to race for the next couple of months. I might as well just do this. And so that was it. I literally had one day of like good weather window before I had to leave the country. And I had scheduled it so that I think I left at midnight. My flight was at 6 a.m., like a day and a half following that,
Oh,
basically
wow.
30 hours after I left. So
So
it's
you
like if
literally
I
had to
didn't get the
run back to Lukla to
FKT,
make your flight.
yeah, exactly. If I didn't get the FKT, I was gonna like miss my flight out of Nepal. I like really set myself up for failure here, but it
Yeah.
also served to be a great motivator because when I got to that point where it's like you're 18 hours in, it's getting dark again, and like you're getting cold, you're still 15 miles away from the home base, and it's like, oh man, it could get really hard right now. And it's like, well, I don't have any choice. I have to do this. I have to keep
Yeah.
going.
Incredible.
Or I'm literally going to get stuck here.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
one of our lovely audience members, Vet I Run, has been out to Nepal and they've done that hike. And they said that was that an up and back? They said my
yep,
trek was 18 days up and 3 days down.
yep. Yeah, so that's a lot of people do it like that. They go real slow up because they're acclimatizing on the way up. I was lucky in that I had spent the previous 2 months before the trials at altitude, so I was already pretty well acclimated.
Where were you at
But still,
altitude before? In the
I
States?
was down in no, I was in Quito, Ecuador, actually.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so that's been like kind of my winter home base for a while, and that's at over 9,000 feet. So I've always done pretty well at altitude, but once you get over 15, 16,000 feet, it's a whole different animal. Being at 9,000 feet doesn't prepare you that much for that, but I was able to kind of just grind through that section, and yeah. So I think I was up in 12 hours and back in 11 hours. It was 23 hours total.
Wow, incredible. Wow. So you went there mostly just for a fun trip, and then you realized when things weren't there weren't gonna be races for the rest of the year. You decided to just go for it, and
Yeah.
you set up logistics and everything. Did you like eat Nepalese food on this thing? Did you bring enough like American nutrition? Did you bring all of like your race gear? Like knowing that if you had planned to do this FKT, was there
Yeah.
gear that you would have wanted to bring with you that you didn't have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I probably would have brought a little bit more kind of like standard trail running, like hiking food. I was honestly like, I got a lot of calories from like these little like Nepalese coconut cookies that come in like a roll, like an Oreo roll. Like, it's either your viewer there who's been on this trek. It's a really logistically relatively simple thing to do because you go through a lot of little towns that have stores and stuff, so you can buy fresh water, you can
Mm,
buy snacks, and they do cater to Western tourists who are coming in and want Oreos and candy and stuff like that, which you know when you're doing a long trail effort, like at the end of the day, that's what you need. So I did have some. I had a couple like gels and like drink mixes, stuff like that I could use. But yeah, I definitely would have brought a little bit more of that. But yeah, it was definitely an impulsive decision, and it really like set me on this path of just like saying yes to like cool opportunities that came up in 2020, and that's really kind of shaped how my year has gone, and like
yeah.
trying to just yeah, like take those swings that I normally wouldn't take.
So two of our coaches, Morgan and Holly, whom you guys all know and love, they just ran. One ran the Javelina 100, and the other
Yep.
was scheduled to run the Javelina 100, but she actually, for a whole bunch of reasons, decided to stage her own 100-mile race back in Virginia
Well,
over the same weekend of Halloween. But the gist of it was, given how the uncertainty of the year, they didn't really know the race was actually going to happen until like 5 or 6 weeks before. So they just sort of had to
yep.
roll with it. Um, had you ever done any racing for 24 hours before? What was like the
Oh God.
longest continuous run you had done before that? It's
Like
so
six
long.
hours.
You went
Yeah,
from your
I
longest was 6 hours to going to
yeah. So
23 or 24.
I ran the U.S. 50-mile championships in 2019, so a little, almost exactly a year ago. That was my first 50-mile race. I won that race. It was my first national title. It took about 6 hours,
Was that a
and
road or
that
trail?
it was technically a road race. It was mostly like dirt fire road.
Interesting.
So yeah,
Wow.
but it was very runnable. It was like a running
Yeah.
race. So this was completely out. And again, I'd been preparing for a marathon, so like this was totally outside of what I had been preparing for. And I've always loved the mountains. I've always liked big hiking days, big trekking days, but I'd never done anything like this. There was really like no reason to think that like this was reasonable, other than I had had a really good week of just kind of fast packing around the mountains and felt pretty strong, and was like, again, like if I add up all these little piecemeal chunks and I just like do 8 days of hiking in a row without stopping, then it'll be fine. So somehow that worked out, and it was all right. And I was
That's
really tired,
incredible.
but yeah.
Yeah, wow. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around the mental aspect of that. So we've gone deep into the story, but like let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
What got you into ultra running in the first place? I mean, towing the line for the 50-mile national championships is a big deal. Winning it is obviously a big deal. Like, what led you to there?
So, gosh, that's really quite good. Like, how far back do you want to go? I mean, I was always the kind of runner who just liked going longer. I started in high school like a lot of other runners, and then even in college, I was the kind of runner who I always wanted to be pushing the mileage, like running more than my coach wanted me to in college, and like we butted heads a lot. And I was always like, I want to be running 140 miles a week, and my coach was like, you don't need to do that for 8K cross country or 10K on the track, which is what you're racing. But I kind of always just knew I had this feeling from the way that I trained and raced that like just as races got longer, I always did better. I was better at the 10K than I was at the 5K. And then once I graduated from college, like I was better at the half marathon than the 10K, and then I was better at the marathon than the half. And then I think among runners, like college runners and like recent grads, there's kind of this like stigma about the ultra world a little bit. There's like this a little bit of elitism where people are like, oh, it's the marathon is a premier event, and then that's it. Like you don't go longer than and so I think it took me a few years to kind of get over that.
It's sort of like when your like running career is kind of coming to an end, then you'll like
right.
go to trails.
And it used to be like
not throwing shade on you trail runners out there. Yeah.
no. And again, I completely admit this, and I've gotten over it. And I'm very glad I did. I wish I had done it 5 years earlier. But I was saying it used to be like this with the marathon. Like people used to think of the marathon that way. It's like, oh, when you're too slow to run the track, and then you run the marathon. But anyway, yeah. So for some reason, it just took me a long time to be like, why would I not be better at the 50K than the marathon? And then I did a 50K in 2015. I made the U.S. Worlds team twice. I finished second at Worlds in 2016 in the 50K. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm better at the 50K than the marathon. And then it was just a natural progression from there to 50 miles. And then, now 100K, someday 100 miles.
Wow.
Haven't gotten there yet. But like, I haven't found a point where I don't keep getting better as stuff gets longer. I think I am someone who has a pretty strong mind when it comes to running, as well as like physiologically. Clearly, I'm more built for endurance than I am for speed. I was never a super fast miler or 800 runner or anything like that.
We're all talking relative speed, right? You're probably
Sure.
probably pretty darn quick.
Yeah, I mean, relative to my peers, say in the marathon trials or something.
So let's talk about, this year. I think this was a pretty interesting story of adaptation, and I think it's something that we can all relate to a little bit. You had probably a year that you had planned events, and a lot of those were canceled. What were some of the events that you were targeting after the Olympic trials that you were excited about that had to be canceled or pushed or changed?
That's a great question. You're making me nostalgic now. So I think the goal.
Let's just focus on loss and pain and hardship for a little while longer.
2020 was originally going to be marathon trials, good speed base, and then U.S. 100K road championships, which would be in April, and then that would lead well into Comrades Marathon, which is
okay. I was going to ask you if you were ever going to do that in South Africa. That's an epic race.
Yep. So that was the real focus of early 2020, was building into that, and then hopefully for the fall, if that U.S. 100K went well, then I would have an automatic spot for the U.S. World Championship team in the fall, which I think was going to be in September or October. And I would run that. Those were really the two big races, would be Comrades and then 100K World. So yeah, the year really would have been focused on those, relatively long road ultras, but races that are still pretty fast, coming off the marathon.
Interesting. So do you ever see yourself targeting, the more elite ultra trail races like Western States or Ultra Trail Mont Blanc? I'm sure you've been asked that question before.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think about it a lot. The truth is, like, I'm not a very good trail runner, relatively speaking, yet. I think trail running is something that it's a skill, like anything else. I think, the analogy you could make is like, you could be really good at running, but maybe you're not a great triathlete or something.
Yeah, sure. Where would you, if you were on a trail race, right, with a bunch of other athletes, and you were kind of on like a flat fire road, you're all kind of keeping up,
Mm.
where would they start to pull away from you? Like what parts of the
Downhill.
course? Downhill?
Downhills. Yep. So I've actually been running. So since I moved to Flag, I've been running with Jim Walmsley, who's one of the best trail runners in the world. I've gone to the Grand Canyon with him a few times. We've run around Flag a whole bunch, and it's like literally unbelievable to see. And not even like a lot of the other really good trail guys in Flag. It's like we'll just come to a relatively, like for me, relatively technical, like rocky
Yeah.
descent, and within 1 minute they are 100 meters in front of me. It's like night and
Incredible.
day. And so that's the kind of thing where it doesn't matter how good of a runner you are. I don't care if you're a 2:04 marathoner or a 2:34 marathoner. Like that is a skill set that you have to have. And if you don't have it, then there's absolutely no way you can compete in a race that has pieces like that. So yeah, I'd love to run Western. I don't, UTMB is a crazy race, but like I'd love to run races like that. But I know I wouldn't want to do it until I felt really ready, and like I'd really developed that skill set a lot better than I have right now.
Yeah. You got a fan in the audience. Barry Sterling says, "Hey, check out my man Tyler Andrews. What's up?"
So I gotta give a shout out to Barry because you mentioned Javelina. So Barry ran Javelina, his first 100 miler. And I
Oh,
actually paced him,
congratulations, Barry.
for 20 miles. Yeah. So shout out to Barry. He's been a big supporter for my whole career. Definitely an inspiration to me. The dude's run 100 miles. I've never run 100 miles. It's pretty badass. So yeah, shout out to Barry.
Well, that's great. So you were at Javelina and you paced him. Very,
Yeah.
very
So it
cool.
was actually a really, really cool experience. I've like mostly been on, the elite side of road racing. And so to see the trail racing scene, it's like a very different experience when you're there for 24 hours and you've got your whole tent set up and you've got a big crew and there's all this logistical stuff. I find it very, very fascinating. Like I'm an engineer and I really enjoy the logistical side of like
Yeah.
planning stuff, making sure you got the nutrition right, making sure everything else is dialed in. So yeah, I think that part of trail running like really appeals to me.
Or just winging it and running for 24 hours in Nepal on a whim
But see,
because,
even that, like I had like a whole day where I like had my notebook out and I was like writing down like, okay, this is the time that I have to hit for this section, and this is how long it is, and this is how much gain there is, and like this is where I'm gonna restock and all this stuff. So like I really enjoy that part, like the planning part of racing.
So you're a professional runner for Hoka, and you had all these races scheduled for 2020. A lot of that was swept aside. You took your this opportunity while you're in Nepal to do this very cool thing, and then you got back. You're like, the world is crazy. Maybe my legs are probably more than a little sore from running marathon trials, flying,
Yep.
hiking to Everest Base Camp and down, and then running to Everest Base Camp and down, and then flying back. So where are you then? What's happening, and like what's in your
Oh
mindset
man.
for the rest of the spring?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I was still kind of holding out hope that things might happen later in the spring. Like I don't think I'd given up on Comrades yet. Comrades wasn't canceled until
Yeah,
later. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that there was just this, if my memory serves me right,
And
there
for
was like
those of you
this
guys who
month
don't
or
know,
so.
Comrades is this double marathon in South
Yep.
Africa. It's usually in like the middle of June, and it is like
Yep.
the as crazy as the U.S. is about, say, the Boston Marathon and say like the New York City Marathon. Like South Africa, like Chicago Marathon
Yeah.
is like that times probably bigger. Like it is a
Yep.
massive thing.
It's the biggest road ultramarathon in the world. It's the oldest road ultramarathon in the world. It's probably almost certainly the most prestigious road ultra. And yeah, they get tens of thousands of runners. It's unbelievable, and it's a huge spectacle in the country. So yeah, so I was back and really just we were taking it like 1 week at a time because again, I'm sure everyone remembers. Like if you think back, it was like everyone was kind of like, how long is this going to go on? And people were like, it can't like the Olympics hadn't been canceled yet, so people still
Mm,
thought, oh, the summer we might have races. Like June
right.
was like, oh, maybe this is going to happen. And I remember there was some race in August that got canceled, and I was like, oh, that's a really bad sign. Um, and then it was just yeah, everything got canceled. And so again, I just really took that time to like say yes to weird stuff that came up. Like I so I don't know if you heard about this or I'm sure some of your viewers did, but there was the virtual backyard ultra
Virtual
that
backyard
happened.
ultra.
Yeah. So um, I don't know how much context we have to get to that, but basically it was a virtual race. It's usually an in-person race, but happened around the world. And the idea is you run a little over 4 miles on the hour every hour until you can't
Yeah,
anymore.
we do need to give a little context to this because I think it's a really cool and clever event. And isn't it the race director, the same race director as the Barkley Marathons?
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
correct? So
Yep.
for those of you guys who haven't watched the Barkley Marathons documentary, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this
It's awesome.
guy Lazarus, you can probably say all of this better than me, but is like I've never seen a race director who chain smokes and is just irreverent in so many different ways and just
Yeah.
makes runners do the most insane things. I just remember one detail from the documentary where runners are going out in these unmarked places and they're doing these insanely long, arduous hikes in the middle of the woods in Tennessee in March, so it's cold. And so we left all this
Yep.
water out, but it froze. And so there are a bunch of runners complaining about it. He's like, well, yeah, it's the winter. It's like, of course it froze. So you're just like, it's just
Yeah.
like, in so many places this wouldn't fly, but it's like somehow like I'm not saying he provides bad service, but there's like this veneer of like bad service, and it's like the worse
Yeah.
service he provides, like he seemingly attracts more runners.
Yeah.
It's just such a
It
trip.
has this lore, yeah, that it's because of that's like part of why it's so hard. Like there aren't, fancy aid stations out there, and there aren't course markings and GPS and like all the stuff that we're used to in trail races. It's just, that race is really more like an orienteering race, and
Oh my
it's
gosh.
insane. But
So he
yeah.
created this other incredible, fascinating brainchild called the Backyard Ultra. And it's a last man or woman standing event. And you have to run a 4 mile loop every hour, correct?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
so take it away. So this year they're doing they're doing a virtual version of it.
So this was back in like April, I think. And again, I was just giving an example of like another kind of crazy thing that I said yes to on a very short notice, where I think it was Thursday, my housemate and I heard about this. And normally this is the kind of thing that like runners would kind of nerd out about, and we'd like talk about like, oh, like that's an interesting concept for a race. Like I wonder what the best way to do that would be. Do you run faster and have more rest, or do you run really slow and conserve energy? And normally that's it. You would have the conversation and then it would be over. But because it was 2020 and it was like, well, there's nothing else. Let's just do it. Let's do it and just see how it goes. And yeah, so my housemate and I did it. We did a bunch of it together. I kind of like capped myself. I said, I kind of took a different approach. Again, normally it's, you see how long you can go. I wanted to, because again, I was still thinking about comrades. So I was like, I'm just going to treat this as like a really hard workout day. So I'm going to run at my comrades race pace and just try and see how long I can do that. And so I think I ran 102K or something, like about 60 miles. And but at a pretty good pace, but again, split up. So you're doing it, it's like 25 minutes on, and then you rest for 35 minutes, and then
Wow.
you do 25 minutes again. And then you keep doing that for
How
15
many hours was that were you doing it for?
15 hours.
15
Yeah.
hours.
So I think,
Wow.
yeah, we started in the dark, finished in the dark, but it was really fun because I would like come back and my housemate and his girlfriend would be like she was like teaching a yoga class one time, and then there's another time where she was like making pancakes, and it's like we're just like hanging out, watch TV. It's like, oh, I gotta go run another 4 miles. See you guys. I'll be back in
Would you
25
run the
minutes.
same route every time?
I did split it up. I had one loop that I really liked, and I was actually living in California at the time, and part of it went on the beach, and so I could only do that loop for part of the day because it literally like the tide washed over the beach, like you couldn't run on it. So I think I had like 2 or 3 loops that I alternated between, but I'm like a rhythm runner, so I don't mind. Honestly, if I could have done every single loop on my little beach loop, it would have been great.
You would have been great. So you went and you kind of had your plan to go, and you went 60 miles for 15 hours. Just to give people appreciation for this event, do you recall like how far the winners went?
Oh yeah. So I started at like 6 a.m. and finished at 9 p.m. or something. And I wake up the next morning, which is 24 hours, and you cover 100 miles in 24 hours. So it's like 4.1 something miles. There are still like 100 people in the race at 100 miles. Um, and then we have a whole day, we go to bed again, and we wake up the next morning and they're still going. And now they're at 200 miles. And then it's all day. It's not until that evening that they're down to two guys, Michael Wardian, who's a good friend of mine,
Yeah.
and Radek Brunner from, I want to say from Poland. I might be getting that wrong. That are still going at it. And finally, after 62 hours, something like that, it was like 275 miles, nonstop. They don't get sleep breaks of more than, whatever, 10 or 15 minutes. So
just the sleep deprivation of that and the regularity, that's so hard, because if you're a faster 100 miler, granted you probably couldn't keep that pace for 2 or 3 miles, but you could like run in 15 hours or 16 hours, and so that's like a long day, but you sleep. But this, just to kind of drip that over a long time, is just so crazy. Yeah, so it's fun. I think a lot of us as runners, we're like, well, I can never do 100 miles or do this. Like, what are some of the things that just like, where did you have to go mentally to get through those things? And like, you're a coach as well, right? Like when athletes get stuck and they're feeling sort of unmotivated, like what are some of the things that maybe you've learned in these different crazy ultras and FKTs that you kind of pull back to every day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the cool thing about really long stuff is that you have a lot more time to think and feel sorry for yourself and make excuses for why you should stop, and then get over it and actually do it. Like if you're racing a 5K, it's really hard, but then it's over and you're like, okay, it's done. And you can kind of look back on it and be like, oh, maybe I could have pushed a little harder here, but like really, like you're running up against your physiological limits in, a 5K or a mile, or even in a 10K, or even up to a marathon. I think it's pretty similar. But once you start being out there for 12 hours, 20 hours, it's a different kind of head game where like, like the Nepal example is a really good one that I use all the time, where it's like, again, I got to that point where the sun was setting and I was feeling real sorry for myself, and I still had 15 miles to go or something. It's like, well, you could stop, but like you have to keep going because you're going to miss your flight if you don't do that. Like you have to do this. Like there's no, even if you have to literally walk and take a break every minute, you're still going to make it. It's going to be hard and it's not going to feel good, but you can do that. And so I think that's the difference between, again, even like a fast marathon or something, is like, I think a lot of marathoners, it's like once they get to that point where it's like, oh, I could finish, but I'm going to have to like walk it in. A lot of people, especially at the elite level, will just be like, no, I'm just not going to finish. Like, I'm not going to walk 3 miles or something, But in an ultra, like, okay, like then we're going to walk, Like it's so much more about just finishing. And I think that changes the focus so much for people in terms of really being able to deal with that negative self-talk or that doubt or the like literal pain that you're going through. And that makes you so much stronger afterwards. I feel mentally like such a tougher athlete this year, I guess, because of a few of the things that I've done over the last couple of years. And, when I think back to like putting myself in that place, I'm like, yeah, that was really miserable. I felt awful. But it's like, in retrospect, getting through that made me such a stronger athlete and just like human being. Like it's easy to take those lessons, and whatever, sports is metaphor for life is such a cliche, but it's true. Like you can really use those moments of being like, I was in a really dark place and had to get through it. And that was all, like, there was, the only way out was through,
Yeah.
And I did that.
Sometimes the only way out is through. Very true. Yeah. So what are some of the things that I want to kind of stay on this mental component of things, because that it's just been, we're at a time in our country on this day, we're all required to be a little patient. We've had to be patient this year for different reasons. Are there some things that you have, like little mantras or things that you've tried to remind yourself or say, or does it every time you go, does it like, I have to get out of this in a new way? Or is it like, okay, I'm in a bad spot, I've been here before, and I know how to get out of it? And if you know how to get out of it, like what were some of the things that you would do to help yourself get out?
that's a oh man, that's like you could write a whole book about that. I feel like. I think I definitely do have little phrases, affirmations. So there's a bunch of different answers to this question. Um,
Do you
one
feel comfortable
is,
sharing any of the affirmations?
oh yeah, sure. I mean, so one that I use a lot, maybe this isn't even an affirmation. This is more like a little mantra. And I wrote Barry Sterling a little note before his race, and I mentioned this to him, which is just the phrase "hunker down," and it comes from a quote from one of my favorite books, where the author writes about a guy who's dealing with a really painful situation, and he says, "I had to that each every moment was bearable. There was no single moment that was unbearable. And I had to hunker down in each of those moments. I had to hunker down in the space between my heartbeats and live in there. And that as long as I didn't let myself look too far ahead or look too far behind me, that every single moment I could deal with." And so I think about that a lot when
Mm.
especially when I'm doing something really long where it's like, okay, like I can walk another step. I can walk to that light post. I can walk to that tree, or run or whatever it is when I'm, feeling like I can't go any farther. It's like, yeah, I can always go a little bit farther. Like you're not going to die. You're not about to collapse. So yes, you can keep going. And I think I do that all the time in practice too, where you're breaking things up in your mind. So instead of thinking it's a marathon, I have 26 miles, it's like, okay, I have to get to 5K and then I have to get to 10K or I have to get to the half. And then you kind of like keep breaking the chunks down smaller and smaller until you're again like hunkering down in this little tiny space where it's like, okay, I can deal with this amount of time, even if it's 1 second and you're just going from 1 second or one heartbeat to the next. Like I think that's probably, if I had to like boil my whole philosophy of like dealing with really hard situations down into 2 words, it would be hunker down. I think that's the closest thing I have to like a mantra or a
I can see
phrase or
the
something.
T-shirt. I love
Yeah,
it. I think that's
just
great.
hunker down.
Hunker
Yeah.
down.
Affirmations, I really like fired up, ready to go. Um, that's one that I use to just get myself psyched up, especially before stuff. Other things, just like, so maybe I don't have like one sentence affirmations, but one thing that I try to do a lot is just draw on positive experiences
Mm.
in my mind. So I think back to really good workouts I had leading up to an event. And so when things get hard, I go to that workout and I think, oh, hey,
Mm.
you know what? There were parts of that workout that really felt hard and where I was really doubting whether I was having a good workout or not. But in the end, it actually, was great. So it's
It's
like, I'm right here
Yeah.
again,
I love that you brought that up because I think that we're all getting practice this year, but it's our mental game is a result of what we practice on the daily,
Yep.
and we draw back to the reservoir. Like Travis said in comments, like a squirrel storing nuts for the winter, one nut one at a time.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but if I'm
People talk
not
about a
going
positivity bank. Yeah, it's a
exactly,
very
but if I'm
similar
not
idea.
going through that daily practice of, oh, I'm in a little mini hard spot right now. Oh,
Exactly.
I can use this for later. Remember this really hard part of this training session when you're in your race. Go back to what you went through and build from there. Was that something that you always had? Was it obvious to you, or did you like have a moment in running younger, junior high, high school, college, where you were like, oh man, like I had a coach or a fellow runner that like really showed me how to do that?
Yeah, I'd probably give credit to my high school coach, John Waldron. He's still coaches me today. He's still a mentor in my life. And he really taught me that idea that mental toughness, mental strength is something that is teachable, is trainable. I think a lot of the time we see, like, oh my gosh, Mike Wardian ran 265 miles without sleeping for 3 days. Like, and we're like, I could never be that tough. I could never do that. And like, obviously physically that's an amazing accomplishment, but mentally, I think there are a lot of things that you can do to train yourself in the way that you use your mind every single day, whether that's in running or in everyday life. And so I think there are a lot of things that I do very actively every single time that I run, that I work out. the way that you pay attention to things. I should give a lot of credit to my dad too. I think he taught me a lot of this all the way from the time I was a little tiny kid. You know, he was a big proponent of this guy named Tim Galway, who wrote a famous series of books. The Inner Game of Tennis was his most famous. The Inner Game. If you Google Inner Game and Tim Galway, you'll find his stuff. But he was really all about paying attention to what's happening, and trying to separate judgment from attention. That a lot of the time, what causes distress is we pay attention to our bodies and we say, oh, so this is really bad. Like I hit a bad stroke in tennis, or I ran a bad split in my race. And instead of trying to reframe that as, okay, like what happened? Just describe it objectively. I hit the ball and it hit the frame of my racket, or I ran 10 seconds slower than I expected to at the same effort. And then you just have information. And now it's like, what do we do with that information? Okay, maybe I have to increase my effort to run the same pace. Maybe I am maybe my stomach is upset and I need to deal with that. Maybe I'm low on calories and I need to fuel a little bit more. So it kind of just takes, it takes the emotion away from it a little bit and reframes it as just information. And then it's like, okay, let's just deal with this. Let's deal with this like
kind of
like
removing that
else.
Judgment away and then just focusing on
judgment.
Solving the problem. So I want to move to another part of your career, which is you're not just an athlete yourself, you're a coach. And I want to talk a little bit about how you got into coaching, and then of course that nice name on your t-shirt right there.
Sure, yeah. So I started coaching. I guess I should say I've always been really interested in training theory, in the science of sport, all the way back to high school and college. I actually took 2 years before I ran for an NCAA team, where I was not running for a college team. And I was still working with my high school coach, John Waldron, but really learning a lot about the training process. So I think I've always known, even from, when I was 18 years old, like I'm super into this side of the sport, not just for me, but for other people. And so graduating, going pro as a runner, within a couple of years, I would say I started coaching some athletes kind of on the side. Most of them were like personal friends or acquaintances or like 1 degree kind of people who knew who I was, or just reached out and said, hey, will you, help me train for this marathon or something? And then Chaski Endurance Collective, which is the shirt you mentioned, we really founded that with the idea that there are a lot of people in a similar boat, people like me, and a lot of my other coaches in the collective who are in a similar boat. They are maybe want to coach some athletes. Maybe they've already been approached to coach some athletes, but there's a lot of work that we can share together as a group that's going to make it way better for us as coaches, and also provide a way better experience for all our athletes. So that was another 2020. Sorry.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I want to get more into that, but before we do, you kind of bring up this notion that, okay, at younger age, I had this mixed ritual. I was interested. I was curious about the kind of the why behind things, and simultaneously, you had some friends approaching you to help you with them, with their coaching. Now, I think a lot of us can assume, oh man, if this guy or gal is just a lot faster than me, or they're pro level, they know a lot more. Like they're automatically a coach, or must be a good coach. Whereas that isn't always the case. There are some really, really fast runners out there that are incredible athletes, but just because they're an incredible athlete, it doesn't necessarily make them a good or appropriate coach. And largely because if you were an athlete, you have to put so much of your time, energy, and resources into your own body. So how do you delineate those two things? Like what do you think maybe made people want to start coming to you for coaching? And when you start looking around and you see other people coaching and training other runners out there, like what are some of the traits that you look for and be like, oh, okay, this person has what it takes to be, like a good coach?
Yeah. So it's a really important point. And again, this is like another thing you could write a whole book on. I guess the first counterfactual I provide is like, you don't have to be a runner at all to be an excellent coach. There are plenty of examples of that, all the way from high school to
Yeah.
elite athletes. Brother Colm O'Connell is probably the most famous example, who coached double Olympic champion David Rudisha in 800, who is, he was a old fat Irish smoker who had like never run a step in his life,
Yeah.
and has coached a handful of
Totally.
Olympic gold medalists.
And quick aside, if you guys have ever read Running with the Kenyans, it's a really, really fun read about this. I can't remember if he's Irish or Scottish runner and author. He's a name that I can't pronounce. That's like Celtic.
Finn. Just call him Finn.
Finn. There we go. Finn.
That's what
but he lives in Kenya for a period of time, and he just like dives deep into this world. And Brother Colm is definitely a character in that book for sure.
But anyway, so I think the other side of the Brother Colm coin is there are lots of people who are super high level athletes, like you talk about, that probably wouldn't make great coaches. And I think a lot of those people probably self-identify and wouldn't try to coach. But I think there is this kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to say misunderstanding, but just like this idea that, this person, this person is Olympian, or this person, is a super high level runner, and I look up to them, and I love their Instagram feed, and therefore I want them to coach me. And the way that I see it is that I think if you're a pro athlete, you kind of like have the initial qualifications to become a coach. But to me, coaching is mostly about the relationship with your athletes. It's mostly about getting to know your athletes and understanding their circumstances, and then prescribing the training that is appropriate based on that. So yeah, obviously you have to have the training knowledge and training background to be able to do that. But a huge part of that is basically like bedside manner, for lack of a better word. It's like, how do you communicate with people? How do you read people? How do you make sure that you're providing training that is actually working for people in their real life, not just in theory? And I guess the last thing I would say is, I think there's almost like, it can almost be a problem with like super high level runners, because I think and I've been guilty of this when I first started writing training plans for people who were, a little bit slower than me, where I would basically just kind of scale down what I did and apply it to them. And that doesn't work necessarily.
It's like, I run 100 miles a week, so I'll just give them 50 miles a week. Not a problem.
Right. It's like, I'll just cut all my training in half or something and give that to a person trying to run, 320 instead of 220 or something. And it doesn't really work like that. That the training that you have to give people of different levels and different, experience levels, like how long they've been running, it's so different. So I think, there's definitely, there's a huge learning curve where you can kind of go in super overconfident as an elite athlete and be like, oh yeah, I can totally train you. I can just kind of scale back all the stuff that I know that I do for myself, or that my teammates do, or my coach prescribes me. But the truth is, like, you're a professional athlete. Like, your whole life is your training. Like, a normal person can't do that. Like, it doesn't just scale. It has to be interpreted in a different way, and it has to be built around their real life.
So I'm gonna ask you a question, and I realize I'm kind of setting you up here a little bit, but is there a problem in the current way and system that most endurance coaching works in the United States? Does the system work? Are the run coaches out there good?
Yeah,
and I know I'm setting this up kind of controversial
to get a tweet storm against me. I love it. Okay, so here's what I'll say. I think the problem is that most people equate high athletic performance with high coaching ability. And that I think that there can be some correlation between those two things, but I think it's much less strong than people think. I think that there are a lot of people out there who are coaching without certification, without technical training in how to actually coach recreational athletes or masters athletes or youth athletes. So yeah, I would say that there is a problem in just that I think the marketplace is very opaque, I guess, to like use some weird technical terms. Like people there isn't like a directory of, run coaches for adults. There's no certification board. It's not like being a high school coach, where you have to apply for a job and have certifications and have a resume. A lot of it is literally just people on social media, advertising, and there's this whole black market basically where people are getting paid under the table. And again, that's kind of one of the things that we saw as like, hey, this probably isn't great, because people, again, I think this is probably pretty contained, but like, sure, there are people who are probably almost getting taken advantage of in terms of what they're being provided with, and the credibility of the person providing that, and what they're paying. I think personally. So again, I don't want to stir up a ton of controversy and like trash the whole industry. I think that we are trying to do things really differently, and we are trying to be more professional and be a lot more transparent about what we do. But at the same time, I think there are also, as much as there are people that or whatever, there are some problems in the industry, I think there are plenty of people who are doing a really, really good job.
So you do say, which I found intriguing, on your site. You said like Chaski Endurance Collective is here to reinvent online coaching, which I thought was like a very strong out of the bat type of statement. And so I appreciate you dropping and talking about that a little bit there. How about this? For those athletes out there who are looking for coaching, and they're looking to maybe get that next level of help, how would you? What standards? What questions would you have them ask of their potential coach?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we should like have a whole page that just has like, here's the 4 questions you should ask or something. So one that I would ask is like, do you have any coaching training or certifications? Like where do you get your coaching information? The other that I would always ask is, what do I actually get? Like, how much do I get to interact with you as the coach? Like, do I get to call you anytime that I want? Do I get to, do we have a set time? Is it like you just send me my training plan and then we never talk again? And then the third thing, which is kind of a subset of that second thing, is how many athletes are you coaching? Because if you say, I'm coaching 200 athletes, you're not coaching 200 athletes. That's basically not possible, in my opinion. I think coaching individuals, it's one thing if you have a cross-country team, and I know
everyone's on the same program type of deal.
Everyone's on the same program. People are relatively similar in ability. Yeah. And honestly, like most of those guys have 5 assistant coaches if you have 200 kids on your team.
Yeah.
So that can be done. But if you have 200 adult athletes training for different events of different skill levels, you are not coaching those people. That is not coaching. You can say, I'm writing training plans for those people that I occasionally update and check on and comment. But to me, that's not coaching. That's writing training plans. And that's a different thing. And if that's all you need, cool, you can do that. But like, let's separate what I would consider coaching, which involves human to human interaction, from writing training plans, which is technical. And honestly, there are a lot of training plans online for free. So there are books that have training plans in them. Jack Daniel's running formula has been around for a long time, and there are tons of online resources that people can find for free. So to me, when I think about coaching, the most important thing that I would be paying for is the interaction with the coach, because that's the thing that you can't get from a book or you can't get from a table online. So that's the real question, is like, how much of that am I getting? How much of your time am I getting and your energy?
That's awesome. So it's not just you at Chaski Endurance, you have a whole team of coaches now. A lot of people on our YouTube channel, they come to us because they find different problems they're trying to solve for running. They like our live shows. They like tuning in. Maybe they've downloaded our app, which you should if you haven't already downloaded our app, and get into some of our great programs and audio workouts. But like, let's say they do want that more interaction. They go over to Chaski Endurance. Like, how does it work? What can they expect to find and do?
Yeah, so I think you talked about like our reinventing online coaching line, and I think that it is strong, but I stand behind that. And I think the one thing that we are doing really differently than almost everybody out there is we are really focused on building a community. And that's between us as coaches, so as a group of coaches, and also between our group of athletes. So both of those things were super, super critical to us from the very beginning. We saw right away, hey, there's so much power in the community of runners, whether it's your club or your high school team or your college team. That's what we really wanted to harness and create, was something like that, but on a national and global scale of runners and coaches that could help each other out. And as we started setting up our coaching staff, we realized it was even more valuable than we realized, because as a group of coaches, we are way stronger than any one individual. As I might know a lot about, training marathon and 50K and 50 miles, but I don't know that much about training 100 miles. But, Chris Brown and Devin Yanko and Pete Kostelnik, who are on our staff, like those guys do. Michael Wardian is another one.
Yeah.
Like those guys have all run 100+ milers. So it's like, if someone asks me a question, I can very comfortably say, you know what, I don't know. But then I can follow that up with, I'm going to ask my staff and get back to you. And then I can get 3 world-class athletes to give you an answer on this thing that I don't necessarily know about, but we as a group have that knowledge. So that's really, I think, the big difference in terms of what we provide is like, we see ourselves as a group. It's, there's a reason it's Chaski Endurance Collective and not Tyler's Endurance Collective. It's, it's all of us. Like our strength is our group, is our team, and how we've built that.
Yeah.
And how we interact with our athletes.
I love it. That's powerful. So we're going into this winter. It looks like there are some races in the spring. I know Boston has already been deferred again.
Yep.
What's your mindset? How are you adjusting going into this winter and spring, and how are you helping adjust the mindset of your athletes? I think for a lot of our runners on the channel, we're all figuring out what to do. The normal races I signed up for, I can't do it. What other fun virtual events may be happening that I could participate in?
Yeah. So part of this with both myself and my athletes was figuring out pretty early that if you want to have goals this year, you basically have to have them such that you don't have to rely on a big race. So again, it could be an FKT, it could be a virtual race, it could just be, I'm going to go to the track and I'm going to run a time trial by myself. I'm just going to go out with a stopwatch and I'm going to run 5K or a mile or whatever that is. So with my athletes, I've really tried to focus on that idea that, hey, like your goals don't have to go away just because the race went away. We can still go run 26 miles. You can still go run your 10K or even a 100-mile. Like you talked about the person on your staff who did a solo 100-miler. That's crazy, but you can do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing to focus on with 2020 and honestly even into 2021 is if you have a goal, just like put that goal on the calendar. And if it's a marathon or if it's an ultra, just like be mentally prepared that, hey, you know what, this might get canceled, and have a plan B. And maybe that plan B is, oh, I'll do this virtual race that's 2 weeks later. Or maybe it's, I'm just going to literally go out that same day as the race was planned and do whatever that distance is by myself. When I've trained a couple people who are racing a marathon this fall, actually this weekend. And that was the plan that we had from 4 months ago was like, okay, we're going to run a marathon on November 7th, no matter what. Hopefully it's going to be in a race. If it's not, you're just going to run 26 miles, have fun. Like we'll find a cool course for you to do that we can set up. So there are still ways. Like running is a very cool sport like that in that you don't need to go to a basketball gymnasium. You don't need a football team. You don't need, whatever, anything other than yourself and your shoes and the ability to go outside. And we've been very lucky in that haven't had those things taken away from us yet in the United States. So I think as far as goal setting, that's really what I would say is like, just have that attitude where like, okay, like my goals don't change. Even if it's the race is happening or the race is not happening, I've still got this goal, whether it's finishing a distance or running a PR or whatever that is. You could go do those things. You know, and then it'll make you tougher. And when races do come back, you'll be like, hey, you know what? I did that last marathon by myself. It's going to be 100 times easier when I've got, you know, all my running buddies around me, and you know, I can actually, you know, whatever, share a water bottle, share some miles, have a good conversation, stuff like that. It'll just be easier.
Incredible. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for being on today and for chatting. Guys, we have links to Tyler and Chaski Endurance both in the description of this video. So if you want to learn more about him, ask him questions. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer anything. If you want to learn more about the Chaski Endurance Collective, please check them out. We didn't get a chance to talk about it too much, but they do a lot of great virtual events as well. They've done some very innovative things this last year, and they have. And maybe we'll just like drop a little, you know, little bird seed now for people to go peck out on their own. But you guys are helping to host the upcoming unofficial 50K. You finish. I don't know what it is.
Sorry, it's the unofficial 50K World Championships. It's going to happen November 28th. You can run your own 50K anytime the week leading up to November 28th, and then we'll have an elite competition on the 28th itself that you'll be able to tune in and follow along for. We'll have teams from all over the world going at it, so that'll be super cool. It's chaski.run/challenge, and I should mention that is 100% free to enter. All of our races, we've had a couple of virtual races at this point, and they've always been free. It's a kind of pay for whatever you want kind of system. So if you want, you know, your T-shirt, your race medal, stuff like that, you can buy them, but we don't make you. So totally free if you want to just register and have your name there, have that event on the calendar that, you know, that will happen. Go do your race, and you'll be in the results. And you know, anything else, it's cherry on top for you.
I love it. Well, guys, check that out. I know I'll be tuning in on the 28th. Tyler, a total pleasure. We will be keeping track of you online.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.